Buenas tardes. Welcome to a conversation about Latina leaders closing the gap. We'll start with some statistics, and I will say some of these are pre-pandemic, but they were very important for me to mention. And I think that it's no secret, they've likely gotten worse. So here goes. 4% of executive positions at Fortune 100 companies are held by Latinas. 4%. Hispanic women make 64.6% of what white, non-Hispanic men make. In fact, Hispanic women with bachelor's degrees have median weekly earnings less than those of white men with some college or an associate's degree. And 2% of board seats are held by Latinas. The data has been provided by Deloitte, Catalyst.org, and the Hispanic Association for Corporate Responsibility, as well as the Department of Labor. Sorry, it's the journalist in me, have to give you the citations. Now, the disproportionate number of Hispanic female leaders also has led to a wage gap, which is now obviously at an all-time high post-pandemic. And so we've assembled this group of distinguished Hispanic female leaders to offer takeaways and actionable, specific takeaways so that people like them are no longer a rarity in positions of power and influence. Our first talking point: what is corporate America's role in addressing the obstacles faced by Latinas? And so when I think of this, I automatically thought of human resources departments and thought this, I think, falls squarely in kind of their world, their wheelhouse. So we have with us today, I'm sorry, this microphone, I think I'm going to take it off. Yeah. We have with us today Priscila Guaso. Priscila, you are an HR executive and author of Latinas Rising Up in HR. I'd like to ask you, what is your view on corporations' role in all of this?
Thank you so much. A lot of times everyone thinks of human resources and that we have the keys, right, to make all the changes.
We do.
We do.
Tell us.
We are your partners, right? I really believe that. And at the end of the day, I know a couple of us in here have love-hate relationships with human resources. So I'd love to have that conversation. But at the end of the day, in my 16 plus years and speaking to many, many Latinas that are in HR, a lot of times what we're looking for is really that partnership in HR. And to answer your question of what can corporations do, it comes down to the numbers, and Claudia spoke of that, right? Are we publishing those numbers? What our metrics are in each of the businesses that we support, right? How many Latinos are in our businesses and how many are in executive roles? I want to see bigger numbers. I want to see bigger percentages. When I see us in single numbers, single digits, it infuriates me because we shouldn't have such little numbers, especially with the high population that we have as Latinos. And so it really comes down to, yes, we are helping, we're the helpers in HR, but we also need you as people leaders to help us as well. We also need the executives to come in and make changes. We need a lot of that. And at the end of the day, it's thinking about where are we recruiting, where are we developing, where are we retaining our employees? And again, without the numbers, we can't show if we're making any changes. So it really comes back to that. I think the accountability through numbers.
And so in your experience throughout your career, what have you observed are some best practices or something that you advise people to follow that perhaps other non-minority groups have already developed strategies for?
Yeah, I've spoken to so many amazing leaders that are Latinas, and I will tell you, I see so many of our white brothers and sisters come through the doors of HR and say, hey, I deserve a raise. I really think I should have that title change. I really think this is something I should have. And let me tell you why, X, Y, and Z. And let me show you the data, X, Y, and Z, right? I would love to see, I have yet to see, I probably can count on two hands how many Latinas I've seen walk through the door and do that. And I would love to see more of us come through the door and do that because that's how we're going to make change. We have to advocate for ourselves. And I know, with our culture, sometimes we wait for others to advocate for us. Yes, we should have that too, but we are the biggest advocates for ourselves. And one of that is sharing, knowing our worth, knowing what our salary ranges are. And if you don't know, find a friend that works in HR.
And now we have you, Priscilla.
Yes, you do.
All right. So I like to call this part of the conversation beyond the DEI programs, because I think that they're a great first step, right? The diversity, equity, and inclusivity programs that have become pretty much standard, I think, in so many corporations in this country. But I think that many employees feel or suspect that some corporations, maybe not all, have created them as a way to sort of check a box and just kind of look like they are being inclusive and supportive of all groups, when in fact, I think many of us, including myself, have experienced situations in which I did not feel supported in these same companies, and sometimes even by women and Hispanic women. And so I feel like in some cases, you know, the core of how employees have treated, this philosophy has not reached the core of how employees are being treated, really. Sort of like some of these leaders have not really internalized, right, the philosophy. And so I'd like to hear what you have to say, because I know that in your book, and I want to quote, you say, give me a second, I had it here. Here we go. You say, that when you were rising through the ranks in your career in the early stages, quote, I began neglecting important Latinas in HR. No, perdón, excuse me. I began neglecting important pillars to my foundation.
Oh yeah, we're not neglecting
No,
Latina.
no. I'm sorry, Latinas in HR was the previous line. I began neglecting important pillars to my foundation and values. I allowed myself to be influenced by leaders who weren't aligned to my values, and I slowly learned to bounce back from this. And I think that that might happen to more than one person as they rise through the ranks, even being Latinas and Hispanics, right? So how can we ensure that once we reach the top as Latina leaders, we don't turn around and kick those coming up after us?
Well, I have to say there's a special place after we all leave this world that's really warm for women that do not lift other women. I just got to say it. And I know there's some kids in the audience, so I'm not going to say it, but all to say, really I really think the higher you go, we all are going to fall at some point in our career, and the fall is going to be hard, but you want to ensure that you have people around you that are your parachutes, that are helping you when that does happen. When I was moving up, as you mentioned, I did lose myself. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, I was a perfect leader. And I had influencers around me that I'm like, oh man, I want to be them someday. I want to be a leader and executive. And then I saw an ugly side, a really ugly side of them. And I did not use my voice at the time. And I wasn't sure how to. I was the only Latina. Do I speak up? Do I not? What happens? Thankfully, I had some amazing people around me that also noticed, hey, Priscilla, something's going on, right? What's it, to hold me accountable, and also to bring light to me. And I'm so glad they did. Because of that, we now have a community of women, other Latinas in HR, that are supporting one another to really bring that whole notion of together we rise. And that's exactly what we do. But I did come to a little bit of a rock bottom for myself. But again, it wouldn't have changed. Nothing would have changed if I didn't have those core folks around me. One of the biggest things too that I speak a lot about is on sponsorship. And I don't think we talk enough about that as Latinas and Latinos. Again, having a sponsor, someone that's speaking about you when you're not in the room. And are you strategically and also making specific movements to learn who's 1, 2, 3 levels above you, and building relationships with those individuals. They're the ones that are going to talk about the development opportunities for you. They're the ones that are going to talk about, yes, she does deserve that promotion. Yes, she is earning. She does deserve this next big move, this next project, this next opportunity. And so again, it's really important that we focus on that, and we really we become laser focused on sponsorship. We can do that.
Okay. Maribel Morey, you're a social scientist, and I know you have some thoughts as well as why sometimes this dynamic occurs, this where sometimes we don't support ourselves. Can you share a little bit about that?
First, thank you so much, Natalia and Claudia. I was really inspired by Claudia's introductory comments. I love the image of Jorge having to be George when he shows up, because I think a lot of us can relate to that. So first, before why we don't support each other, I would just start with the national and global structures in which we exist, in which we were born into. So there's a book I was just reviewing right now by the historian Tyler Stovall called White Freedom. And he writes that the Enlightenment gave us the rise of our modern conceptions of freedom and democracy. It was also at the same time the height of transatlantic slave trade. So just in the same moment when we have our key ideas about what it means to be free and what it means to be in a democracy coexist when there's just seems ironic, right? Slavery. And he says, no, we shouldn't see it as ironic because we live in a world that has long accepted that certain people should be free and should be powerful, specifically white people, and that others should not enjoy that, specifically Black people. And many of us exist within that global line. So, and we see that as well in the rise of international relations as a field and the making of a white world order. We in Penny Von Ashton's book, Race Against Empire, Edom Getachew, World Making After Empire, Bob Vitalis, White World Order, Black Power Politics, and my own book, White's Philanthropy. But World War II brought this moment when so many of us turned into a colorblind language, right? There's a moment of decolonization, as they call it. So all of a sudden, a lot of powerful voices in these elite white Anglo-American circles were invested in having a colorblind language. And yet, this is a global political and economic hierarchies that we've inherited and still internalize, where to access power is to access whiteness, and specifically white Anglo-American whiteness. And equality in this space has meant assimilation into this identity, though on certain terms, right? Speaking English, really privileging white institutions, assuming that's higher in the intellect. And not everyone, because it relies on the existence of this other, a larger other across the world. So I would argue to your question, Natalia, that to support each other deeply, to call for acceptance of Jorge in his full humanity is actually really deeply radical. It messages that our allegiance is more with the less powerful in this global structure that we've inherited than with the powerful.
Maribel, you are also a philanthropic, yes. You are also a philanthropic historian, which, by the way, I didn't know that title existed. So you have a lot of titles, you can confirm something that we already know, we already see with our own eyes, which is that there is an underwhelming number of Latina leaders in elite philanthropy. And how can leaders of NGOs and nonprofits that are sitting in this audience today really take something with them to support Latina participation in their organizations? And why is it important that they do that?
Okay, so as far as philanthropy, it's because I've my whole life been invested in how to do good better, right? So whether it's in the Catholic Church or in the university or learning different languages from French to Swedish, I'm always in search for like where is a space where we can be good better, right? And philanthropy is one of those spaces. Before I say how to include more Latinas, I do want to do a shout out to Latinas in philanthropy and nonprofits, including Kathy Garcia at Robin Hood, Carmen Rojas at Margaret Casey Foundation, Cynthia Suarez at Nonprofit Quarterly, and Sofia Arroyo at Edge Funders Alliance. We do feel lonely on in these spaces, but we have found each other on social media. It has been really powerful. So I just wanted to mention that. As far as Latina participation, I like your question as well, because many times the focus is on us. Like, what are we not doing that we're not getting noticed? But I think that I like the question because we first have to acknowledge that the lack of presence is an issue of Rolodex. It's a Rolodex problem rather than actual lack of talent out there. So at the Miami Institute for the Social Sciences, which I founded an executive director, and we have an amazing board, we're working on this project called the Index Project to be a resource for all of us to know people out there producing knowledge about humanity across the global South and the global North, global majority scholars, knowledge producers. So the Rolodex needs to be expanded. A lot of us want to, we just don't know how. The people are out there, the talent is there. And also in the definition that people are using to find that talent. Maybe the Latinas, we don't define ourselves in that term. I see that with scholars of philanthropy. Minorities don't necessarily define themselves as scholars of philanthropy. But if you start looking for people who study civil society, nonprofits, then you actually are including, you find the people. And then when recruiting Latina talent, I think it's important to self-analyze how we're defining Latinidad. So we're all types of Latinas across racialized identities, national and socioeconomic backgrounds, and political inclination, right? So are we privileging some of these identities over others? Why? And is it part of the organizational mission? Is it relevant? Maybe it's not. Maybe we could be recruiting all types of Latinas, and we don't need to be gatekeeping that way. And as far as retention, I think it's important to acknowledge that as Latinas, we all have different perspectives and goals on what it means to be part of an organization. Some of us are going to be more assimilationists. Some of us are going to really want to go skiing and wear LL Bean and like speak Spanish, English all the time. Others are not. They're going to push back and be more, retain more of the Latinidad, of the culture. Some are going to facilitate existing projects. Others are going to challenge existing projects and, thinking about the community. So self-reflect, I would say. I think organizations need to self-reflect, nonprofits and philanthropy. What do you want from us as staff members, on the board, as grantees? What is it that you want from us? Because some of us will be, like I said, assimilationists. Others are going to want more cultural pride. Others are going to facilitate programs you already have in mind. Some are going to challenge, and that is the ecosystem.
Maribel, you have another theory that women are not viewed as intellectuals and that is part of the reason why we are not represented to the same degree as other groups. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so as part of that world that I mentioned in the beginning that we inherited, this racialized world, it's been divided by the intellect and the body. We know this. We inherit it. We're not even conscious about it, but we know it. Who's the intellect? The old white Anglo-American man, right? And then whose body? On the other side of the spectrum, it's the darker Black woman in many ways. So to get to a world of mutual respect, we need to see all of our communities as they are, a blend of both. And we all suffer from this spectrum. As Latinos, we're all in the spectrum between whiteness and Blackness. So we should be addressing anti-Black discrimination in this because we're all affected by it. And we see this reality in the classroom. Since we were in a young age, who do we see in our history books? Who do we see who's taught it as like engineers or inventors? When we go into college, who's teaching us? What's the material on global history, on economics? Who are the economists we're learning about? Sociologists, anthropologists, business innovators. So, and then when we're in the office, in the workforce, we see the effects of that because it could be really subtle, like Priscilla was mentioning it, in those conversations of who deserves a raise. Because those images sit in our heads after all those 20 years of education. Then we're in the office and we're deciding, who do we assume, because we're projecting into the future, who do we assume to have the leadership, the intellectual leadership to take this organization forward? And we can call those intellectual shortcuts, but they're there and they've been ingrained over 20 years of education.
But so then what can we do about it?
Be conscientious about it. We need to know that that's playing a part in how we're thinking about each other, even within our own communities, because we've ingrained white supremacy in our ideas of the intellect and anti-Black discrimination and assuming that all other groups are closer and closer to the less intellectual, the bodily, the sensual.
Thank you so much. I'm going to continue with Frances Hondol. She's an executive advisor at Mastercard. Frances, how can leaders inside the organization hold the company accountable for these underrepresented groups at high levels?
Well, good afternoon to everyone. I think I'm going to build on some of what Priscilla was saying, actually. Number one, I think like anything that's important to a company strategy, it has to come from the top. And it has to be, permeate through the organization, through senior leadership for sure. I think definitely our partners in HR are incredibly important. But as I've always said, unless the business really owns it, it's going to be somewhat of an exercise, if you will.
Right.
And so we're very passionate about that. And so look, I think that certainly the more of us who are part of the executive table and advocate, educate, it's incredibly helpful, right? I also think companies, for example, as you remember, just 2 years ago with everything that happened with George Floyd, as an example, there was an unbelievable, served as a catalyst for corporate America to really start talking about what was absent in corporate America as it relates to whether it's, again, minorities on race or ethnicity, or generally underrepresented employees. Could be a number of descriptions. And there was a call to action. And the call to action came both from community leaders, employees, obviously very, very strong advocacy from investor groups and so forth. And so I think that learning from that, and certainly, you know, I'm very, I would say very grateful and lucky to work in a company like Mastercard, that our corporate strategy is about financial inclusion. And when your corporate strategy is about financial inclusion, you have to tap into very different segments of society, right? And you have to appreciate that in order to reach some of these new segments, you have to have a voice at the table that really understands these different business segments, right? And so at an important level, it's a business imperative. I think that's evident at this stage in terms of all of the data that we're seeing in terms of representing, you know, having diverse voices at the table brings innovation, solves different, you know, same problems in different ways. And I think appreciating that is actually becoming more and more evident, and our voices are becoming more evident. But I like Priscilla, believe wholeheartedly that anything that matters must be measured. And so having scorecards and dashboards are very important. And in fact, one of the things that we did this year is 2 years ago, we set ESG goals for our executive team. So for those of us who sit on the management committee at Mastercard, our compensation was directly correlated with progress that we made against our ESG scorecard.
And what is ESG for those of us who are
ESG,
not?
environmental, social, and government policies, right? And what we did in the last this last year is we said that's good, and leading from the top is important, but we all need to own the change that we're talking about. And in fact, now every employee in our companies, you know, at the end of the year, their incentive is tied to whether or not we have made progress against our ESG goals. And so I think that type of commitment in coming from the top, again, really driving towards measurement is I think foundational, because otherwise I'm afraid we're not going to see the level of change that we're looking for.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit on the conversation here. And I'm curious to ask you, Francis, do you think that your leadership style has been influenced at all by your Hispanic heritage? Like, is there anything that makes us as women and Latina women specifically stand out? And in your case, let's just talk about you, because I know that those are generalizations, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I smile at this question because I often I do talk about my career, because I get a lot of questions around, so how did you get to where you are? And I'm born and raised in Miami, so I'm in all those statistics that we saw today, amongst the 70% Cuban American. And I would tell you that my story, my professional story, is very much correlated to my personal story, like all of us are. And, you know, where we were raised, how we were raised, the values, the experiences we have, it all influences how we see the world and how we, you know, of course, how we manage our own lives, including our careers. And for me, it was all about, you know, really my parents' experience, right? Coming from communist Cuba and seeing that a, you know, family that had 3 young kids, I was born and raised here, as my younger brother was as well, came in with and Claudia references the American dream, and really excited about, you know, tapping into that, because they were fleeing something obviously very, very different. And the can do, we are going to make it happen. We're going to make the possible from the impossible. Sort of that mindset very much influenced me in my career, where basically, to be very honest with you, I didn't see barriers in my way, because frankly, I couldn't compare some of my career challenges to what my parents, you know, experienced. Right. I mean, it was almost, you know, silly, frankly. Thank you. It was almost silly to think about that. I was thinking about, well, was my next promotion that, you know, that challenging, where I looked at, well, my parents came to this country, no language, 3 children, and they made it happen. And so for me, that was always very inspirational to build on that. And as a leader, you know, I looked at opportunities to lead, certainly transformational initiatives. Every business that I've led throughout my 30+ career has always been about turnarounds and transformational, situations. I love problem solving. I love the big issue to go, tackle. And I think part of that is just because of what I lived right through my own family, my experience. So that's certainly been influential for me.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to speak with Ana Teresa. Ana Teresa Rodriguez, according to Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, Latinas make up the fastest growing sector of the entrepreneurial market in the country. And as the powerhouse realtor that you are part of this group. You attribute some of your success to taking the perceived weakness of being a Latina and turning it around and making it into your superpower. Explain to us how you did that and how other women, Latinas specifically, can do the same, not just in the real estate market, but in any entrepreneurial venture.
Hi. Yes, thank you so much. And we were talking about this and I'm laughing at each of you because I represent myself in each of your comments. So I'm not even raised here. I was born in Venezuela and I've been here only 20 years. So how a Latina
Only is not, it's
But-
a lot. But yeah,
I'm the youngest one in
I
time.
got it.
And I have a very strong accent. So imagine being a realtor, doing advertising, knocking at doors with American and any type of nationality in this country. It's difficult. Then I became a foreclosure specialist and I need to go to central United States and meet with 90%, 99%. I was the only Latin. The other Latins will perfectly speak English per people. And I was the Sofia Vergara there. And usually you will hide and not talk and be in a corner, not embracing your nationality, your Latin roots. I was talking and everyone was around me laughing and asking me to do their phone recording. So can you do this for me? And I was doing recording for everyone. What happened? I rise immediately. Everyone knew who I was. There was like 5,000 realtors there and I was the Latina with the accent and everyone wants to work with me. So instead of having an issue and being on a corner and embrace it, even some people were trying to bully me because sometimes you feel like that's what they're trying to do, but you can have that low self-esteem and you have to go over. So for me, that's the best example. Like that's how you embrace your Latina. I'm Ana Teresa Rodriguez. Some people said you need to say Ana Teresa Rodriguez. No, Ana Teresa Rodriguez. And I have people, clients from New York, California, everywhere, and they call me Ana Teresa. Hi, how are you? So you can do it. That's not a problem. Everything that we have in our mind, as you said, is like raising your hand and you want to have it. That's important. If we want to be Latinas and we want to be powerful, we cannot stay home and waiting for somebody knocking at your door. You need to walk, you need to dress to impress, you need to ask. Everyone needs somebody to do your job. And if you study, you get knowledge, you read, then when you meet somebody, it's not about if you are Latina, woman, or minority, it's about what you have in your mind. So you have to embrace what you know and be the best professional you are, no matter what cultural accent you have when you're talking.
Thank you, Ana Teresa.
Thank you.
I had a similar situation when I lived in New York. People insisted on calling me Natalie and not Natalia.
Yes, I
And-
like that.
And I get it. It's
I like when I hear Natalia, I say,
Natalia.
that's my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Ana Teresa, just like in corporate environments, though, I'm sure you encounter from time to time discriminatory, demeaning, undermining behavior coming from either clients or colleagues. How do you address these, and how do you advise other Latina women in your sector to follow or address these?
It is impossible to have somebody against. You're not gonna be always like 100% of the people in the room. So that's the first thing that you have to know. Not to feel sorry for yourself if 70% of the people, but if you can capture that 30% that is on your side, you have to align with the people that have the same belief, because we have a huge amount of people around and it's step by step. We cannot change the world completely, but you identify that 30% that is in your favor, that they're gonna work for you, you're gonna work for them, and then you're gonna grow. So it's not like you're going to hide, like, no, I don't agree with you. You're not going to be fighting because then you're a woman and Latina. Like, oh, women's always complain, always those do this.
So to perpetuate, you don't want to perpetuate
Of
like a
course.
myth.
You have to like keep your point, talk about it. If you have to stand up, but very neutral. So that way, when you change other people's minds, is not being quiet, is talking what you really believe. And that's mean when it's a Latina, that's really normal. In a room, when you have 10 guys, I know you have a lot of guys here, but that's something that they do their own men's club and they're going to start talking about something and you feel secluded. It's normal and you take it personally. You need to get involved if it's not something that they are not respecting. And then you get part of the team and then they start talking. It's more, I believe that's something more related about kids playing around than a problem that has become a huge problem. It's the same about minorities. If we get together at the end, we are the same people. It's something that is in our mind. And I have crossed that frontier a lot of times. And then I discovered that the ghost that I was seeing was just a pet that was playing on the other side. So it's kind of believing in keeping your point of view.
But I want to dig a little deeper. I mean, if somebody bullies or insults or antagonizes you or any of the females around you, how do you handle that? Or how do you
I go to,
no, she said.
honestly, I go to the point directly.
Okay.
Yeah, yes. I go to the point. I will ask directly, do you have something against women? That's something, you have something against Latinas? I would like to understand, you don't like to speak with Latin people? You feel like you are superior or something like that? And usually they explain, and usually they have an explanation that is not related to that. In my experience, I haven't had the people that will say, yes, I hate you guys.
I don't think anybody would.
But when you are nice enough to ask, you make them think because sometimes it's in the back of the brain and they don't mean it. So when you ask, and that's something that I learned, when you ask somebody that is trying to trick you with the same question that they ask, so you are telling me that you say this, you're telling me that I have to do this. It's incredible how people change. And no, that was not what I was meaning, because that's the mirror strategy that you change. And that's something that I will invite you to do, even with your partners and kids, always asking. So you are saying this, and that way you are not quiet. They're going to explain. And usually if you are in a meeting, they will explain and they will look super bad.
That is fascinating.
Yes.
So the mirror response, like just to
Yes.
that strategy of mirroring what they're saying and,
Yes.
and following up, is this what you're saying?
Exactly.
Repeating what they
And that
said.
way you are not the crazy one. If you
Yeah.
fight, then
I'm going to
you
apply
are
this
somebody
right
that
now.
is getting in trouble. But when you ask the person that is trying to get you in trouble to explain in a very nice way with their same words, that's important, you're going to see how they change. And people around is going to go directly after them. You don't have to do any of the work. You're going to have 10 people working for you and you will be quiet.
That is a great takeaway, Ana Teresa.
Yes.
Last question. Yes, please. What unique characteristics do you think that we as Latina women have to offer to any sector?
Have you seen this room? Everyone looks fantastic, very well dressed, very well spoken. We are social people. So that's our power. We don't need to change to look like guys. We don't need to change to look like the north of United States. We need to be flower. We need to be white. We need to be pink. We need to dress. We need to make up, and we need to be how you say when you care about empathetic. That's something that is very Latin. We always care. How's your mom? How's your dad? How's your son? That's us. And that's how we are so warm when you are in another type of nationalities, minorities or people that make us stand in when we are in a room, always.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to build on that because I think that's right. I think there's a level of congeniality that's very unique with Hispanic culture. I know from my personal experience, and again, I've worked in corporate pretty much my entire life, and I've really worked with my teams as my family. And I think part of the followership that I've certainly had over the years to do great things, I always attributed to the team. And it's because people felt, I have my hand on their back for support, and just really working together as a team, almost as a familia.
Yeah.
And I think this sort of congeniality, maintaining professionalism, measurement and so forth around performance, but really just working together to make great things happen together. I think that warmth is, I think, very unique. At least I've seen it, relatively speaking, within corporate America. And I think this is a very fantastic attribute that we
Well,
have.
I agree because I have to say, being a woman who grew up in Miami as well, I noticed the difference when I lived in New York City, which I love. I absolutely am enamored. It's the one that got away, but but now, and I'm back home, and once I realized, I remembered all the differences. We are warmer, generally speaking, of course. And I remember, even kissing somebody on the cheek when you walk into a room, I had to stop myself when I was in New York. Oh, wait, that's right. They don't do that here. They're going to think maybe that's a little creepy or whatever, But yeah, I agree with you that is part of the characteristic of being a Latina.
Can I add? to
Yes,
that?
absolutely. Please. How are we
Okay.
on time?
Okay, no, because when we had our pre-talk, we said, like cortadito, we can connect. We obviously as humans connect to people that, we have similarity with. My only caution, and this is me, like the academic sometimes, like just PS, we don't want to be competing with other groups, right? In the sense of like when we say we're family oriented or we are warm, you know what? A lot of Black communities are too, right? Asian communities.
Absolutely.
And I think the big stretch for us is to be really proud of our identity and really proud of other groups and realize that all of us are just people who want the best for our families and our communities at the end of the day.
I love
Great.
that. What a great closing. I think our time is up. That was a great closing. I want to close with a quote from the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said, "Women belong in all places where decisions are being made." End quote. Thank you so much.